Hello and welcome to the Snickerdoodle Knits YouTube channel. I am Jessica, the knitter and designer behind Snickerdoodle Knits, and in this video I am going to demonstrate how to perform a herringbone stitch in the round. So the herringbone stitch is, I really like the look of it, it's a fun look. So it's comprised of diagonals going one direction in one round, and then the opposite direction in the next round. And then it's just a 2-row repeat that creates this sort of arrow effect. It's supposed to represent like a herring fish. So to get started, I'm just working in the round with magic loop. Of course you can do this with DPNs, you can do it with a circular needle of the right circumference, but the technique is still the same. So to start, you will knit the first 2 stitches together. Now, instead of pushing both of those stitches off of your left needle, you will only push the first stitch off. So now you still have one of those stitches left. And this is basically what you do for the rest of the round until the last stitch. So knit 2 together and push that first stitch off the needle. Knit 2 together, push the first stitch off, and just continue that. And so if you're working on small circular needles, you'll just continue this until the last stitch. If you're working magic loop or DPN, I'm going to show you what you'll want to do when you get to the end of a needle, because it's just a little bit different than if you're typically knitting, because you're keeping one stitch on the left-hand needle from each knit 2 together. So again, we're just knitting 2 stitches together, sliding the first stitch off. Alright, so I've just continued to do this till I'm at the end of the needle. Here's the last 2 stitches, so I knit 2 together, slide the first stitch off. And now we're supposed to leave this second stitch on the needle. So what I like to do when working magic loop is I just slide that stitch, pull my cable through, and my cable is really long, but then now it's just on the start of the next needle. So working DPNs, it would just be something similar. You just transfer that to make sure it's on the same needle as your next set of stitches. And so that's when you're working. That's for the middle of the round. That's not for the end of the round. That's just when you have multiple needles that you're transferring your stitches through. And so now starting the next one, next needle, we just do the same thing. Knit 2 together, slide the first stitch off, and so on. And continue to this until the last stitch of the round. And so I'll show you when I get to the last couple of stitches how that looks. Alright, so here we are with the last 3 stitches on the round. We'll continue to knit 2 together, sliding the first stitch off, and then knit 2 together, sliding the first stitch off. And then again, now we have our 1 stitch left. We want this stitch with the next set of stitches. So we'll do the same thing that I did at the end of the first needle. So I'll go ahead, pull this through, and now we have our start. But now when we're starting the new round, we need to do something special with this first stitch. Because what we're doing is we're alternating the direction between each round. So this first stitch, it's now in the direction of the last row, but we want to change the direction to this row. And so what we're going to do is essentially twist this first stitch. And what this does is it just helps tidy up this join along the beginning of the round. It's still not perfect, as you can see here, but it just helps tidy it up a bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to slide this first stitch knitwise onto the right needle. So just as if you were to knit it, slip it to the next stitch, to the next needle. Now transfer that stitch directly back to the left needle. So essentially what we did was we brought it onto the right needle, which twisted it, and then transferred it directly back. Now what we're going to do for the second round is knit 2 together through the back loop, and then only slide the first stitch off. So it's the same as the first round, except for we're knitting through the back loop, and that's what causes the change in direction for those slants, for the diagonals. So just knit 2 together through the back loop until the end. Knit 2 together through the back loop, sliding off the first stitch until the end of the round. And again, we'll do the same thing for the last stitch on each needle that we did before. And when I get to the end of this round, I'm going to show you how what we did changed the beginning of the round location. So when you read the written instructions, like in my patterns, there's a description that talks about how you move the beginning of round marker if you're using a beginning of round marker. And I'll show how that works with what I demonstrated when I get there. So here we're getting close to the end of the round again. So we're knit 2 together through the back loop, slipping the first stitch off that needle until the last stitch. Now, if we had a beginning of a round marker, it would be right here between this stitch and the first stitch on the other needle. So I'll go ahead and place a marker here so you can see what it would look like. So I just placed a marker. This would be the end of round or beginning of round. And so we have 1 stitch left before the beginning of round, correct? So what the instructions tell you now is to take this marker, remove it, and place it right here before the last stitch. And which is essentially what we were doing last time when I just slid this stitch to the next needle. So you're gonna want either a removable marker that you could just remove and place there, or I'm more likely to just slide the marker off, put my needle on, my stitch back on the needle, and you want to be sure you do not twist this stitch. You want to make sure you just transfer it and then put the marker there. So now our beginning of round has just moved 1 stitch, and then we can slide this stitch to the new beginning of round, and we do just like we did last time with the first beginning of round. So to start this round, now we have what was our last stitch of the round before is now the first stitch of this round, because our beginning of row marker, or beginning of row changed, beginning of round changed. And we need to do the same thing where we twist the first stitch. So we slip that stitch as if to knit from the left needle to the right needle, and then transfer that directly back. So that just twisted that stitch, and then we'll work the same as our first round, which was knit 2 together, sliding the first stitch off the needle, leaving the second stitch on, and continuing to the last stitch of the round. And then of course the next round, you of course twist that first stitch, and then you will do knit 2 together through the back loop, sliding the first stitch off, and so on and so forth. So it's just a 2-row repeat. So there you go. That is how you perform the herringbone stitch in the round. The techniques themselves aren't difficult, but it just takes a little bit to get used to exactly what you're doing. The slipping the first stitch off feels a little bit weird, and then that twisting the first stitch of the round and the changing at the beginning of the row marker. So there's a few different things that you just need to remember to pay attention to, but it's a fun stitch to work, and I really like the look of it, and I hope you enjoy knitting it. So again, round 1 is knitting 2 together, sliding the first stitch off to the last stitch, and then you change your beginning of row marker so that last stitch becomes the beginning of the next round, and then you twist that first stitch before starting round 2. And round 2 is knit 2 together through the back loop, sliding the first stitch off the needle, leaving that second stitch on the needle, and continuing that to the end of the round. And again, moving that last stitch of the round to the first stitch of the next round, twisting that first stitch of the next round, and then you just repeat round 1 again, which is knit 2 together and sliding the first stitch off. And just continue that, alternating between knit 2 together and knit 2 together through the back loop for each of the rounds. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I hope you found it helpful and informative. And if you still have questions, go ahead and replay this video at a slower speed, and leave any questions that you have in the comments down below. I'll be happy to answer those. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe to the Snickerdoodle Knits YouTube channel for additional knitting tutorial content like this. I look forward to seeing you around. Happy knitting!